This story is titled, "My Golden Sister Called Me Saying I Wasn't Welcome at the Family Gathering and They Were Cutting Me Off, so I silently hung up and started blocking our parents' company accounts. They thought they could take it all, but now they're begging for forgiveness and financial help." Sup Reddit, my name is Chloe, and I'm 29 years old. For the past 8 years, I've been working as a marketing coordinator, but that title never really captured what I was actually doing. Behind the scenes, I was secretly building my sister's tech empire from the ground up, pouring my heart and soul into every line of code and every system architecture decision. It was a Thursday afternoon around 3:30 p.m. when I received the email that would change everything. I was deep in work, focused on closing a critical security vulnerability in our main platform, when the notification popped up on my screen. The subject line was innocuous enough, but when I opened it, I found just 2 fucking sentences that would end 8 years of my life. Your services are no longer required. Severance details to follow. 2 sentences. After 8 years of dedication, sacrifice, and building something from nothing, my sister Victoria had reduced our professional relationship to 2 cold, clinical sentences. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting the reality sink in. There was no explanation, no acknowledgement of my contributions, no attempt at a conversation, just a corporate dismissal that felt more like terminating a software license than ending a partnership with family. I didn't argue or beg like some desperate employee clinging to their job. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me grovel. Instead, I simply forwarded the email to my attorney and began planning my next move. If Victoria wanted to play this game with such cold efficiency, I was prepared to respond in kind. What she didn't know was that 3 months earlier, I had quietly pulled my seed funding from the startup. While she was busy playing favorites with our cousin Jessica, I had been protecting my financial interests. Victoria and Jessica had convinced themselves that Jessica could handle the technical side of the business, despite her complete lack of cybersecurity experience. It was a decision that would prove to be catastrophic. 3 months later, their investors were running for the exits like rats abandoning a sinking ship. I watched from a distance as everything I had built began to crumble under Jessica's incompetent leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent 8 years building my sister's tech company from nothing, only to be fired with a 2-sentence email and replaced by someone who knew absolutely nothing about cybersecurity. I didn't fight back publicly or create drama on social media. That wasn't my style. Instead, I simply withdrew my personal investment and watched as everything fell apart with the methodical precision of a controlled demolition. They had bet on the wrong horse, and now they were about to learn just how much they had relied on me. Let me give you some background on how this whole situation developed. My 31-year-old sister Victoria started her cybersecurity firm back in 2016 from a cramped San Francisco apartment that barely had enough space for 2 desks and a coffee machine. What began as a desperate attempt to make rent had grown into something remarkable. 8 years later, the company was handling over $7 million in annual contracts, with offices in both San Francisco and Oakland. I had been there since day one, literally from the moment Victoria decided to take the leap into entrepreneurship. In those early months, I spent countless nights writing code alone while Victoria worked directly with clients, trying to build our reputation one project at a time. After we secured our series of funding round, I transitioned into building and managing our engineering team, recruiting talented developers who shared our vision for innovative cybersecurity solutions. Eventually, I became responsible for architecting our flagship security platform, the comprehensive system that would become the backbone of our entire business model. This wasn't just some basic software package. It was a sophisticated platform that I had designed and built to compete with industry giants. My work on this platform directly led to us landing contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies, deals that transformed us from a struggling startup into a legitimate player in the cybersecurity space. The business itself was quintessential tech startup material, but with a crucial difference. We were dealing with life and death situations, not just another social media app or food delivery service. We specialized in penetration testing, developing custom security solutions tailored to each client's specific vulnerabilities, and operating a software-as-a-service platform that monitored for security threats in real time. Our client base included healthcare systems, financial institutions, and government contractors. Organizations where a single data breach could literally mean the difference between life and death for patients, not just some public relations headache that would blow over in a news cycle. Our client list was impressive by any standard. We worked with some of the top healthcare networks in Northern California, financial institutions that managed billions in assets, and government contractors handling classified information. These weren't clients you could afford to disappoint or expose to security vulnerabilities. The stakes were always incredibly high, and the technical standards had to be absolutely flawless. Victoria never missed an opportunity to tell potential investors and industry publications about how she had built everything from scratch through pure determination and entrepreneurial vision. It made for a compelling founder story, the young woman who had bootstrapped her way to success in the male-dominated cybersecurity industry. However, she conveniently omitted one crucial detail from this narrative: the $175,000 inheritance from our grandfather's estate that had funded the entire first year of operations. She left that detail out of her founder story completely, never mentioning to journalists or investors that she had never actually had to hustle for that initial capital. When you adjust for inflation and factor in San Francisco's incredibly expensive tech ecosystem, that inheritance was worth roughly $280,000 of initial capital, money she never had to pitch for, never had to give up equity for, and never had to stress about running out of. It wasn't exactly the bootstrapped, rags-to-riches narrative she was constantly pushing to everyone who would listen. My cousin Jessica was an entirely different story from me, and the contrast between our situations couldn't have been more stark. While I was pulling all-nighters in the office, frantically debugging critical security flaws that could expose our clients to devastating data breaches, Jessica was living the comfortable life of a privileged MBA student at Stanford University, with her tuition and living expenses completely covered by her wealthy parents. When Jessica finally decided to grace our company with her presence 3 years ago, Victoria immediately created a brand new Chief Strategy Officer title specifically for her. This wasn't a position that had existed before, nor was it one that our company structure actually needed. It was purely a vanity title designed to make Jessica feel important, despite her complete and utter lack of any cybersecurity experience whatsoever. Here was someone who couldn't explain the difference between a firewall and an antivirus program, suddenly being positioned as a key strategic decision-maker in a specialized cybersecurity firm. The favoritism was impossible to ignore, and it had deep family roots. My Aunt Helen, who happened to be Victoria's godmother, had become Jessica's biggest champion within the company. Helen wielded considerable influence over Victoria, and she used every bit of it to advance Jessica's career at my expense. The perfect example of this bias came when Jessica decided she needed a company car to meet with potential clients. It was Helen who convinced Victoria that this was an absolutely necessary business expense, arguing that Jessica needed to project the right image when representing the company. Meanwhile, I was still taking public transportation or expensive rideshare apps to get to my own client meetings, despite being the person who had actually built the technical systems that these clients were paying us to maintain. Helen had never once advocated for me the way she consistently did for Jessica. She never suggested that I deserved a company car, a better title, or recognition for my contributions. The double standard was glaring, but pointing it out would have made me look petty and jealous. Jessica's MBA program had focused on entrepreneurship, which in practical terms meant she had spent 3 years networking with venture capitalists at expensive Silicon Valley events and creating PowerPoint presentations filled with meaningless buzzwords and theoretical frameworks. Her actual work experience consisted of exactly one summer internship at a mid-tier marketing agency, and even that position had been secured through nepotism. Her sorority sister's mother happened to be the chief marketing officer there. Yet somehow, Victoria had convinced herself that this minimal resume qualified Jessica to shape the strategic direction of our specialized cybersecurity firm. We were dealing with life-or-death data protection for healthcare systems, financial institutions, and government contractors, and Victoria thought someone with zero technical background and 1 summer of marketing experience was the right person to guide our future. The disconnect between Jessica's qualifications and her responsibilities was staggering. I still remember the moment when Jessica showed her true colors and revealed exactly what she thought of me and my role in the company. We had been courting a major healthcare system for several months, and landing this contract would be a huge victory for our business. I had spent countless weeks customizing our security platform specifically for their unique compliance needs, working through the complex maze of healthcare data protection regulations and technical requirements. I'm talking about genuine 3 a.m. coding sessions where I would lose track of time completely, weekends that disappeared into testing and debugging cycles, and a level of dedication that eventually cost me my relationship when my boyfriend finally gave up on our future together. He couldn't compete with my commitment to the work, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. I was essentially married to my job, sacrificing everything personal for the sake of the company's success. On the day of our final pitch to the healthcare system's chief information security officer and their entire security team, I was nervous but prepared. This was the culmination of months of technical work, and I knew our customized platform inside and out. I had prepared detailed explanations for every compliance framework we had integrated, every security protocol we had implemented, and every technical specification they might question. Jessica arrived 20 minutes late to what was arguably the most important client meeting of the quarter. While I had been there early, setting up our presentation materials and testing the demo environment, Jessica strolled in casually as if punctuality was optional for someone in her position. But her lateness was just the beginning of what would become a completely infuriating experience. Without any warning or discussion, Jessica completely hijacked my presentation. She stepped forward and introduced herself to the client team as the architect of this security partnership, taking credit for work she had never even seen before that morning. Here I was, the person who had spent weeks building the technical solutions they were about to see, and Jessica was positioning herself as the mastermind behind everything. When the healthcare system security team began asking specific technical questions about implementation details, Jessica's complete lack of knowledge became immediately apparent. They wanted to know about compliance frameworks, technical specifications, and security protocols, the kind of detailed questions that required deep understanding of cybersecurity principles. Jessica stumbled through her responses like a deer caught in headlights, clearly having no idea what she was talking about. I couldn't just sit there and watch our potential client lose confidence in our capabilities, so I jumped in with the actual answers they needed. I explained our approach to HIPAA compliance, detailed how our monitoring systems would integrate with their existing infrastructure, and walked them through the technical safeguards we had built specifically for their environment. The client team's relief was visible as they finally got the substantive responses they were looking for. Later that day, after we had returned to the office, Jessica cornered me in the company kitchen. Her friendly demeanor from the client meeting had completely disappeared, replaced by barely contained anger and a threatening tone that caught me completely off guard. "Don't ever make me look stupid in front of clients again," she hissed, jabbing her finger aggressively at my chest. The accusation was so absurd that I was momentarily speechless. I had saved the meeting by providing the technical expertise that she completely lacked. "I was just answering their technical questions," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm and professional despite her hostile approach. "Next time, write down the answer and slide it to me," Jessica continued, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I'm the face of these deals now. You're just the back-end coder, so remember your place." That moment crystallized everything that was wrong with the situation. Here was someone who had contributed absolutely nothing to the technical development of our platform, who couldn't answer basic questions about the systems I had built, telling me to remember my place in the company I had helped create from nothing. The condescension was breathtaking, and it revealed exactly how Jessica viewed my role and contributions. I should have quit that day. Every instinct was telling me to walk away from this toxic situation before it got worse. But instead, I swallowed my pride and kept working, telling myself that I was doing it for the company I had helped build from the ground up, not for Jessica's inflated ego or her power trip. The healthcare contract ended up being worth $2.8 million over 3 years, making it one of the largest deals in our company's history. It was a transformative contract that would significantly impact our revenue and market position. But when the commission reports were distributed, guess whose name appeared as the primary contributor to landing this deal? It certainly wasn't mine, despite the fact that my technical work had been absolutely essential to securing the contract. Last year, I made a discovery that would change everything. Through careful observation and some detective work, I uncovered that Jessica had been systematically falsifying her business development metrics for months, possibly longer. She had developed an elaborate system of lies designed to make her performance look far better than it actually was. Jessica would routinely take credit for contract renewals that were completely automatic, requiring no sales effort whatsoever. She would claim ownership of prospects that other team members had spent weeks or months cultivating, swooping in at the last minute to attach her name to deals that were already in progress. Most egregiously, she was fabricating entire client meetings that had never actually happened, creating fictional interactions to pad her activity reports and make it appear that she was constantly engaged in high-level business development. All of this deception was carefully orchestrated to help her hit quarterly targets and maintain the illusion that she was a valuable contributor to the company's growth. When I discovered the extent of her dishonesty, I knew I had to bring it to Victoria's attention. I spent an entire week compiling a detailed spreadsheet analysis that documented every instance of false reporting I could find, creating an airtight case with timestamps, email trails, and verifiable evidence. When I presented this comprehensive evidence to Victoria, I expected her to be shocked and immediately take corrective action. Instead, she dismissed the entire situation as aggressive business development, as if Jessica's pattern of lies was somehow just an innovative approach to sales metrics. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Here was clear evidence that Jessica was fundamentally dishonest in her professional reporting, and Victoria was willing to overlook it completely. Apparently, aggressive business development was Victoria's euphemism for systematic dishonesty and credit theft. The message was clear. Jessica could do no wrong in Victoria's eyes, regardless of how unethical or damaging her behavior became. I had spent the previous quarter quietly documenting everything, building my case methodically, and keeping detailed receipts of every suspicious activity. Initially, I wasn't planning to use any of this evidence for anything dramatic, but something deep down told me to be prepared for whatever might come next. Call it intuition developed from 8 years of watching my sister operate and seeing how she consistently favored Jessica over everyone else, including me. Then one Thursday afternoon, everything came to a head. I had just finished closing a critical security vulnerability in our main platform, another crisis that I had handled entirely without Jessica's help, as usual. It was 3:47 p.m. when I saw Victoria's email notification appear in my inbox. We weren't the type of siblings who checked in with each other daily about work matters, so I initially assumed it had to be something related to the upcoming quarterly board meeting. I opened the email while continuing to organize my technical notes from the vulnerability fix, half reading the message as I methodically saved my work files. The words on the screen didn't immediately register because they were so completely unexpected and clinical in their delivery. Your services are no longer required. Severance details to follow. I froze completely, my cursor hovering over the save button as my brain tried to process what I had just read. 2 sentences. After 8 years of dedication, sacrifice, and building this company from nothing, Victoria had delivered my termination with the cold efficiency of an automated system notification. I sat there for a full minute, letting her words burn into my consciousness as the reality of the situation slowly sank in. The message was clinical and impersonal, like she was terminating a software license rather than ending a professional relationship with her own sister. After all the years I had invested in building her company, all the family gatherings I had missed because of work commitments, all the personal relationships I had sacrificed for the sake of the business, this was how she chose to end it. A 2-sentence email delivered with less ceremony than most people use to cancel a subscription service. The timing of the board meeting scheduled for Monday suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't just going to be a regular quarterly review like I had originally assumed. This was when the executive team would discuss next year's technical roadmap, allocate resources across different teams, and make crucial decisions about the company's future direction. By cutting me out of that meeting, Victoria was effectively cutting me out of the company's future entirely. Through my office window, I could see directly into Victoria and Jessica's glass-walled conference room. Both of them were standing at a whiteboard, nodding and gesturing as they worked through what was clearly a detailed plan. Victoria never consulted with me like that anymore. Never included me in those high-level strategic discussions that would shape the company's direction. Now it all made perfect sense. They weren't just planning the next quarter's activities. They were systematically planning my exit from the company. I closed my laptop and sat there for a moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as a dozen different replies ran through my mind. Each potential response was angrier than the last, filled with all the hurt and betrayal I was feeling. But finally, I managed to compose myself and typed just 2 words in response. Understood. Forwarded. If Victoria wanted to end our professional relationship with such cold efficiency, then fine. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me beg for an explanation or grovel for another chance. But if she thought she could simply cut me out of the company without facing any consequences for her decision, she had seriously underestimated me and what I was capable of doing in response. I pulled open my desk drawer and retrieved the investment agreement that I had carefully filed away years earlier. There was my signature in blue ink, right next to Victoria's, on the seed funding document that had helped launch the company in its early days. The legal language was clear, and I knew exactly what rights I had as a minority investor in the business. With methodical precision, I began drafting an email to our company's legal counsel. I attached the relevant clauses about investor withdrawal rights, making sure to reference the specific sections that would be most applicable to my situation. The sound of my keyboard felt like hammering nails into a coffin as I systematically built my legal case. I took careful screenshots of everything that mattered: financial documents, technical contributions, communication records, creating a comprehensive digital paper trail. Next, I opened a new email and composed a message to my personal attorney, someone completely separate from the company's legal team. I attached the screenshots I had just taken and typed a clear, direct message. Need to meet tomorrow. Company situation changing dramatically. Let's discuss my options. I hit send, then methodically locked my computer and gathered my personal belongings. I walked out of the building without looking back, without stopping to say goodbye to colleagues, without any of the emotional theatrics that Victoria might have expected. If my sister wanted to play this game with such calculated coldness, then I wasn't going to let her control how my future unfolded. The next day, I moved quickly and decisively. I canceled all my scheduled meetings and cleared my calendar completely, sending polite but firm emails explaining that I would no longer be available for the projects I had been managing. I sent a formal email to Victoria confirming my intention to step away from all operational responsibilities while simultaneously requesting a full financial and technical audit of the systems I had built over the years. There were no emotional appeals in my communication, no attempts to salvage our relationship, no desperate pleas for reconsideration. Just the cold, precise language of an investor protecting their assets and ensuring their contributions were properly documented. After 8 years of my life invested in that company, 8 years of missed vacations and skipped friends' weddings, 8 years of postponed personal plans for the sake of building something meaningful, this was what it had come to. I had turned down a senior engineering position at Apple right after graduation specifically to help Victoria launch her business. I had sacrificed countless opportunities and personal milestones to be there for her vision. And for what? So that Jessica could waltz in with her MBA and immediately take over everything I had built? So that Victoria could dismiss me with the same casual indifference she might use to cancel a magazine subscription? I quietly began the process to withdraw my seed investment, leveraging my minority shareholder rights to protect my financial stake in the company. This wasn't an emotional reaction driven by hurt feelings. This was strategic risk management. If Victoria and Jessica were systematically cutting me out of the decision-making process, then I needed to protect my financial interests before they could do any more damage. While I was waiting for my lawyer's response to move forward with the separation process, I took the time to systematically back up every piece of code I had written over the past 8 years. I carefully archived every system architecture diagram, every technical specification document, and every piece of documentation that might prove my contributions to the company. This wasn't about stealing intellectual property or planning some kind of corporate espionage. This was about protecting my legacy and ensuring there was a clear record of what I had built. When you've spent 8 years building complex software systems from the ground up, you develop an intimate knowledge of exactly where the technical debt is buried, which shortcuts were taken under pressure, and which systems are more fragile than they appear on the surface. This institutional knowledge was invaluable, and I wanted to make sure there was proper documentation of my role in creating and maintaining these critical systems. About an hour after I sent my formal email to Victoria, my phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. Her response was so typical of her entitled attitude that I almost laughed when I read it. "We both know Victoria's been carrying you for years. Don't worry, I've got plenty of ideas to modernize that spaghetti code you've been maintaining." She should have put me in charge of product from day one. I didn't bother responding to Jessica's delusional message. There was no point in engaging with someone who couldn't tell the difference between a firewall and a database, let alone understand the complexity of the systems I had architected. Instead, I simply took a screenshot of her text for my records and continued working on my comprehensive exit strategy. Jessica had always been someone who talked a big game without having the technical knowledge to back up her claims. Her ideas typically involved buzzwords she had picked up at entrepreneurship conferences and networking events, without any understanding of the underlying technology or the practical challenges of implementation. The fact that she thought my carefully designed and battle-tested code was Spaghetti code just demonstrated how completely out of her depth she was. The next morning, I received a text from Tyler, our lead security engineer who had been with the company for 6 years and actually understood what we were building. Tyler was one of the few people in the company who truly knew what he was doing from a technical perspective, and his message confirmed my worst fears about what was happening. Victoria just called an emergency all-hands meeting, Tyler wrote. She announced that Jessica's taking over as Chief Technology Officer effective immediately. The woman couldn't explain a basic SQL injection attack if her life depended on it. The irony was staggering. Here was Jessica, someone who had never written a line of production code in her life, being handed the technical leadership of a cybersecurity company. She was now officially responsible for systems she didn't understand, serving clients whose needs she couldn't comprehend, and managing technical challenges that were completely beyond her capabilities. Apparently, Jessica had been busy poisoning Victoria's perception of me for weeks or possibly months. Tyler's message revealed that Jessica had been telling Victoria that I was secretly planning to launch a competing product, claiming that I had been copying proprietary code for months with the intention of starting my own business. It was a complete fabrication, but Jessica had always been skilled at manipulation and had clearly convinced Victoria that I was some kind of corporate threat. Jessica had always had Victoria wrapped around her finger, and this situation was just the latest example of how she could convince my sister of almost anything if it served her purposes. The fact that Victoria would believe such accusations without even confronting me directly showed just how much our relationship had deteriorated and how much influence Jessica had gained over her decision-making. I spent that entire night methodically documenting every significant contribution I had made to the company's codebase over the years. I took detailed screenshots of commit histories that showed my involvement in every major feature and system improvement. I carefully archived every technical decision I had implemented, every crisis I had resolved, and every innovative solution I had developed to meet our clients' unique requirements. I knew exactly how this scenario was going to play out. Based on my understanding of both Victoria's management style and Jessica's complete lack of technical competence, I could predict with reasonable certainty that they were about to face a series of increasingly serious technical crises that would expose just how much they had relied on my expertise and institutional knowledge. 48 hours after I had sent my formal separation notice, my phone suddenly exploded with notifications. I watched in amazement as the missed call count climbed steadily. 73 missed calls from Victoria alone, plus dozens more from my Aunt Helen and several frantic attempts from my parents, who had no idea what was happening with the company situation. I scrolled through the increasingly panicked text messages and listened to a few of the desperate voicemails, watching as the tone evolved from professional inquiries to barely controlled panic. Victoria's messages had started with clinical, business-like requests for information, but as the hours passed and my silence continued, they became increasingly frantic. Her words carried something I hadn't heard from her in years: genuine desperation and fear. "Chloe, we need to discuss the repository access. It's urgent," read one of her earlier messages. Then, "Call me about the AWS credentials. This is important." And finally, "Chloe, this isn't a game. The entire platform is at stake." Our cloud services provider had apparently left several voicemails as well, and I could hear the anxiety vibrating in their representative's voice. "Chloe, we need to speak with you immediately. There are critical access issues with your company's infrastructure that require your immediate attention." I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. I had given them a reasonable head start to figure things out on their own, but reality was finally catching up with their decision to cut me out. And honestly, I was just getting started with demonstrating how essential I had been to their operations. What Victoria and Jessica apparently didn't realize was that 4 years ago, when I had completely rebuilt our entire technical infrastructure from the ground up, I had inadvertently made myself absolutely essential to the day-to-day operation of the business. This hadn't been intentional. I had actually documented everything thoroughly and tried to create systems that others could maintain. But some aspects of running a complex technical operation simply can't be transferred in a single day or even a single week. There were intricate details like the complex authentication system I had designed specifically for our security requirements, the sophisticated deployment pipelines I had configured to ensure our software updates could be rolled out safely, and the institutional knowledge about our security protocols that I had accumulated over years of dealing with actual cybersecurity crises and learning from real-world attacks. By the 6th day of maintaining my strategic silence, The messages had escalated from concerned business inquiries to genuinely desperate pleas for help. My Aunt Helen's voicemails were breathless affairs, with her words tumbling over each other in her rush to convince me to respond. You could hear the panic in her voice as she realized that Jessica's grand promises about taking over the technical side were proving to be completely empty. My mother tried a much gentler approach, as she always did when family conflicts arose. "Chloe, honey, I don't know what's happening with the company," she said in one voicemail, "but I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding between you and Victoria. Please call your sister back and work this out." I appreciated that my mother meant well and was trying to be a peacemaker, but I knew my sister far too well to believe that this was simply a misunderstanding. This had been a calculated decision to push me out and replace me with Jessica, and now they were discovering the consequences of that choice. On the 7th day, I received an automated alert from our company's code repository system that made me sit up and take notice. I opened the notification carefully, bracing myself for whatever new crisis had emerged in my absence. As I scanned through the technical logs, my jaw literally dropped at what I was seeing. Victoria and Jessica had attempted to grant full administrator access to an outside development agency, apparently trying to bypass all the security protocols I had carefully implemented over the years. They had even initiated the process to migrate our entire code base to a completely new repository system where I wouldn't have any access or oversight whatsoever. The only reason their plan hadn't succeeded was because the authentication system I had built required multi-factor approval for such significant changes to our infrastructure. This was a security feature I had implemented 3 years ago after we had experienced a close call with a potential data breach, and it was designed to prevent exactly this kind of unauthorized access attempt. Apparently, Victoria had completely forgotten about this security protocol in her desperate rush to push me out of the picture entirely. The system I had built to protect our clients' data was now protecting my own interests and contributions to the company. At that moment, I realized that Victoria wasn't just trying to remove me from the company's daily operations. She and Jessica were actively attempting to erase my contributions entirely, cleanly, and permanently. They probably assumed I would be too shocked or emotionally devastated to take any meaningful action in response. They thought I would just accept their decision and quietly fade away, leaving them free to rewrite the company's history without my involvement. But by crossing that line and attempting to steal my intellectual property, they had given me the perfect justification to strike back with everything I had. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or family drama anymore. This was about protecting my professional reputation and the work I had spent 8 years building. I took a deep breath and called my lawyer immediately. We had an extensive discussion about the legal implications of what Victoria and Jessica had attempted to do, and by the end of our conversation, the wheels were in motion for something much more serious than simply withdrawing my seed investment. "They've made this relatively straightforward for us," my lawyer explained. "Attempted intellectual property theft combined with unauthorized access to protected systems represents a clear breach of fiduciary duty. But I need to ask you directly, are you absolutely certain this is the path you want to take? Once we file these papers, any possibility of reconciliation becomes nearly impossible." I didn't hesitate for even a second. "I'm completely certain," I replied. "They started this war when they decided to try to steal my work. I'm just making sure I win it." The next morning, I began compiling every document I had that was related to the company's technical infrastructure and business practices. I spent hours creating a comprehensive dossier that highlighted every shortcut, every security compromise, and every instance of technical debt that Jessica and Victoria had insisted on over my strong objections throughout the years. Years of suppressed frustration and professional concern fueled my focus as I methodically documented their poor decision-making. There was Victoria's persistent habit of cutting corners on mandatory security audits to save money, even when dealing with healthcare clients whose patient data was at stake. There was Jessica's consistent pattern of insisting that we rush new features to market before proper testing had been completed, prioritizing marketing timelines over security protocols. I documented the consulting fees that had been paid to my aunt's graphic design company, which had never actually delivered a functional website despite being paid for months of work. I found records of the offshore development team that had been granted access to our production systems against all established security best practices, creating potential vulnerabilities that could have exposed our clients' sensitive data. It was all there in the company's records, meticulously documented and time-stamped. Every corner that had been cut, every security protocol that had been ignored, every instance where business pressures had been allowed to override technical best practices. When I finished compiling everything, I had assembled a truly damning collection of evidence that painted a picture of systematic negligence and poor technical leadership. I filed formal complaints with our investors, providing detailed documentation of potential breaches of fiduciary duty and highlighting the security risks that had been introduced under Jessica's influence. As a precautionary measure, I also froze access to the code repositories pending a comprehensive security audit. This wasn't just about protecting my own work. It was about ensuring that our clients' sensitive data wouldn't be further compromised by Jessica's reckless approach to cybersecurity management. I also prepared detailed documentation for our largest clients, explaining the potential security implications of the recent management changes and attaching the most concerning pieces of evidence from my dossier. I wasn't sure if this approach would be effective, but I was determined to find out what would happen when our clients learned about the security shortcuts that had been taken with their data. Finally, as a strategic move that I knew would carry significant weight, I sent a detailed technical risk assessment to our largest client, a major hospital network whose chief information security officer had become something of a mentor to me over the years. Dr. Rodriguez had been working in cybersecurity for decades and had actually given Victoria her very first major contract when we were still a struggling startup. Dr. Rodriguez valued technical excellence and transparent security practices above absolutely everything else in his professional relationships. I knew he wouldn't appreciate learning that corners had been systematically cut when it came to his organization's data security, especially when patient information was potentially at risk. I expected Victoria and Jessica to retaliate against me in some way, but I had prepared for that possibility. I had already taken steps to secure all my personal finances, moved my assets to new accounts that were completely separate from anything connected to the company, and ensured that my name was removed from any company credit lines or financial obligations. If they wanted to come after me legally or financially, I was no longer exposed to their attacks. That night, I sat in my apartment overlooking San Francisco Bay, watching the water shimmer under the city lights as I reflected on how dramatically everything had changed in just a matter of days. Part of me felt a small twinge of regret about how far the situation had escalated and how completely our family relationship had deteriorated. There was a time when Victoria and I had worked together seamlessly, building something meaningful from nothing. But another part of me, the part that remembered every dismissal, every time Jessica had been favored over me despite her obvious incompetence, every systematic devaluation of my contributions to the company, felt nothing but cold satisfaction. They had made their choice when they decided to treat me as expendable, and now they were beginning to understand the consequences of that decision. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler, who was still working at the office and witnessing the chaos firsthand. "Complete chaos here today," he wrote. "Your cousin tried to deploy to production and somehow managed to crash the entire platform. Your sister's been locked in crisis meetings all day with increasingly frantic investors and clients. Hope whatever's happening between you all works out, Chloe." I smiled grimly as I read his message. They were discovering in real time just how much they had relied on my technical expertise and institutional knowledge. And this was only day 7 of their brave new world without me. That same night, my phone rang with another call from my mother. I hesitated for a moment before answering, knowing that she was probably going to try to mediate the situation, as she always did when conflicts arose between Victoria and me. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Chloe, I know you're hurt, and I completely understand why," she began, her voice carrying the familiar tone of someone trying to keep peace in the family. "But can we talk? Just you and me? I think there are things that need to be said." I paused, considering my options carefully. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want to drag my mother into the middle of this corporate and family mess. She had always tried to maintain neutrality during the many arguments between Victoria and me over the years, and she didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of what had become essentially a business war. "All right," I finally said. "Let's meet tomorrow. But I want you to understand that this isn't just a family disagreement that can be smoothed over with a conversation." The next day, I met my mother at a small coffee shop in the Mission District that we had visited together many times over the years. She was already there waiting at a window table when I arrived, watching the door anxiously. When she saw me enter, she straightened slightly, but her expression remained deeply worried and concerned. My mother had always been the designated mediator in family conflicts, and over the years, she had perfected the delicate art of maintaining neutrality during the frequent arguments and disagreements between Victoria and me as we were growing up. It was a role she had never asked for, but had somehow inherited by default. "Chloe, what's really happening here?" she asked, keeping her voice low and leaning forward slightly. "Victoria is completely falling apart. Helen says the company is in complete crisis mode. They think you're actively trying to sabotage everything they've built, and Jessica is just making the whole situation worse by promising things she clearly can't deliver." My mother deserved to know the truth about what had transpired, but I also didn't want to burden her with technical details and corporate complexities that would only cause more family strain and put her in an impossible position between her daughters. "They attempted to erase me completely from the company, Mom," I explained carefully. "Victoria and Jessica were trying to copy all of my code and technical systems to a new repository, essentially trying to cut me out of the picture entirely and steal my intellectual property. I'm just ensuring they can't appropriate my work as they push me out." Her eyes widened in surprise and concern. "That can't be right," she said, shaking her head. "Victoria wouldn't just... I know there must be some kind of misunderstanding here." "What about Jessica?" I asked pointedly. "Would she do something like that?" My mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes or deny the implication of my question. Jessica had always been manipulative and self-serving, even in her interactions with my mother. She had a long history of taking advantage of family relationships when it served her purposes. I remembered one particular incident that perfectly illustrated Jessica's character. She had borrowed my mother's car during college and returned it with a significant dent in the front fender. When confronted about the damage, Jessica had claimed with complete conviction that the dent had been there before she borrowed the vehicle. Of course, Victoria had immediately jumped to Jessica's defense and covered for her, just as she always did whenever Jessica's behavior was questioned. I pushed a thin folder across the coffee shop table toward my mother. It contained carefully selected screenshots and documents, just enough evidence to make my point without overwhelming her with technical details or dragging her deeper into the corporate warfare that was unfolding. The folder included repository access logs that clearly showed unauthorized attempts to copy code, suspicious large-scale data transfer activities, and email chains where Victoria and Jessica had explicitly instructed an outside developer to expedite the migration process of my work to systems where I would have no access or oversight. My mother flipped through the papers slowly, her expression growing more concerned with each page. The evidence was clear and damning, showing a deliberate pattern of attempting to exclude me from my own work. "Oh, Chloe," she said quietly, closing the folder and pressing her palm flat against it. This is clearly deliberate. They were really trying to lock you out completely." "Yes," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "And that's just the beginning of what I discovered. They've been systematically compromising security protocols for months, maybe even years. I found evidence that they gave production database access to an offshore development team that we've never properly vetted or cleared through our security processes." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Mom, if I hadn't acted when I did, our healthcare clients could have been exposed to serious data vulnerabilities. Patient information could have been compromised because Jessica doesn't understand the first thing about cybersecurity protocols." She closed the folder completely and pressed her palm flat against it, as if trying to contain the implications of what she had just seen. "You have to talk to Victoria," she said firmly, though her voice carried less conviction than her words suggested. "There must be some kind of explanation for all of this." "And Jessica?" I asked again, more pointedly this time. She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. My mother knew Jessica's character as well as I did, and she couldn't bring herself to defend Jessica's actions when confronted with clear evidence. "I gave them multiple chances to explain their behavior," I continued. "You know what Victoria did instead? She fired me with a 2-sentence email, then immediately put Jessica in my position the very next day. There was no discussion, no attempt to work things out, no acknowledgement of my 8 years of contributions. "Just please don't destroy everything," my mother said, her voice carrying a note of desperation. "Helen says the investors are already asking serious questions about the company's stability and technical leadership. If this situation continues to escalate, I don't know what will happen to the business that you and Victoria built together." "I'm not the one who started this destructive process, Mom," I replied firmly, "but I promise you that I'm going to finish it properly." That evening, I received another notification from our company's code repository service that confirmed my strategic decisions had been effective. The emergency freeze on code changes that my attorney had implemented was working exactly as intended. By leveraging the intellectual property clauses I had insisted on including in our original operating agreement, clauses that required my explicit approval for major architectural changes. We had successfully halted their attempts to steal my work. The repository service had flagged multiple suspicious access patterns over the past week, along with several large-scale code extraction attempts that were still pending in their system. I could picture Victoria and Jessica standing in that glass-walled conference room, watching helplessly as their carefully constructed plan to push me out unraveled hour by hour. I wasn't just protecting my own code and intellectual property. I was systematically exposing the fundamental flaws in their leadership and their complete lack of understanding about how to run a technical business. I knew the cybersecurity industry well enough to understand exactly what a comprehensive code freeze meant for daily operations. Client updates wouldn't be able to go out on schedule. Critical bug fixes would be delayed indefinitely. The continuous integration pipeline that they relied on for delivering products to clients would be completely paralyzed. It was the technical equivalent of cardiac arrest for a software company, and there was no quick fix that Jessica's MBA buzzwords could provide. I woke up the next morning to find my phone vibrating constantly on my nightstand. My email inbox was completely flooded with notifications from multiple sources: our repository service, my lawyer, and increasingly panicked messages from Victoria's business partners and investors. The security audit that I had triggered was proceeding faster than I had initially expected, and it was clearly revealing serious problems that went far beyond what anyone had anticipated. I scrolled through the latest alerts from the repository system, taking note of the scope of what had been frozen. They had successfully locked access to over 320,000 lines of code across multiple repositories, affecting virtually every aspect of the company's technical operations. The system had also flagged an additional 140,000 lines of code for suspicious commit patterns going back 4 months, suggesting that Jessica's problematic changes had been occurring for much longer than anyone realized. This represented a complete technical stranglehold on the company's ability to function. It was enough to halt all product development completely, leaving them unable to fulfill commitments to clients or investors. The scale of the freeze demonstrated just how central my work had been to every aspect of their business operations. Victoria had left 6 increasingly desperate voicemails on my phone overnight, each one more frantic than the last as the reality of their situation became clear. "Chloe, please, I don't know what you think you're doing," her first message began, "but you're destroying everything we built together. Call me back immediately so we can fix this situation." I deleted all of her messages without responding or even listening to them completely. I had given her multiple opportunities to handle this situation professionally, and she had chosen to escalate it into corporate warfare. Now she would have to live with the consequences of that decision. About an hour later, my mother called again, and I could hear the strain in her voice immediately. "Chloe, what exactly did you do?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled but clearly tense. "I did what was necessary to protect my work and my professional reputation," I replied calmly. "They're in complete panic mode, Chloe," she continued. "Victoria is talking about hiring lawyers and potentially suing you for sabotage. Helen is beside herself with worry about the company's future. And Jessica is making wild promises about fixing everything if they just give her complete control over all technical operations." I wasn't surprised by any of this. Victoria and Jessica had never been particularly good at handling technical crises, and they certainly weren't equipped to deal with the systematic lockdown I had implemented. "I gave them a fair chance to resolve this professionally, Mom," I said. "Victoria made her strategic move by firing me and trying to steal my work. Jessica took my position, and I protected what belonged to me. I'm not backing down from this." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before my mother spoke again. "Fine," she said finally, her voice carrying a tone of resignation. "Meet with them one more time. Just once for my sake." I hesitated, knowing that any meeting at this point would likely be an exercise in futility. But I owed my mother at least that much consideration. "All right," I said, "but this is absolutely the last time I'm willing to discuss this with them." As I hung up the phone, my lawyer called with an important update about the ongoing situation. The repository service's preliminary audit had already uncovered enough serious red flags to warrant a much more thorough investigation into the company's technical practices and security protocols. Based on what they had found so far, Victoria and Jessica were potentially looking at intellectual property violations and breach of fiduciary duty charges if the situation continued to develop along its current trajectory. "You need to decide how far you want to take this legal action," my lawyer explained. "Right now, you have significant leverage because they're completely desperate to regain access to the systems you control. This might be the optimal time to negotiate a settlement that cuts you loose from the company with your fair share of the assets and recognition of your contributions. I considered his advice carefully. A settlement would certainly be cleaner and faster than prolonged litigation. It would allow me to move on with my life and career without the ongoing stress of legal battles. But something deep inside me resisted the idea of letting them off so easily. This wasn't just about money or even professional recognition anymore. They had crossed lines that went beyond simple business disputes. We arranged to meet at Victoria's condominium in downtown San Francisco that evening. I had been to countless dinners and strategy sessions in this sleek, high-rise apartment over the years. We had discussed product roadmaps on that balcony overlooking the bay, celebrated our first $1 million in revenue at that dining table, and planned the future of the company in those same rooms. Now, walking into that space felt like entering hostile territory where I was no longer welcome. My mother opened the door with a nervous smile and gave me a quick hug. She looked absolutely exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and the kind of tension that comes from trying to mediate an impossible situation. Inside the apartment, Victoria was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows with her arms crossed, projecting an air of confidence despite the obvious desperation of their current situation. Jessica sat at the kitchen island like it was her personal throne, casually scrolling through her phone and feigning complete indifference to the crisis that was unfolding around her. Her body language suggested that she considered this entire meeting to be beneath her attention, which was typical of her attitude throughout this whole ordeal. "Let's get this over with," Victoria said curtly, gesturing toward the dining table where we had shared so many family meals and business discussions over the years. As I sat down, I couldn't help but notice how every award and press mention displayed throughout the apartment highlighted Victoria's individual achievements while systematically minimizing or completely erasing my contributions to the company's success. Had the apartment always been decorated this way? Or was I just seeing the reality of our relationship clearly for the first time? "So what exactly is this meeting about?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral and professional. Victoria turned to face me directly, her face flushed with barely controlled anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Chloe?" she demanded. "Freezing the repositories? Triggering security audits? Filing complaints with our investors? You're actively trying to destroy everything we built together over the past 8 years." I met her gaze directly without flinching. "I'm destroying things?" I replied. "This is coming from someone who fired me without any warning or discussion? You think I wouldn't notice when you and Jessica tried to gain unauthorized access to my code? You think I'm just going to sit back passively while you try to erase my contributions to the company I helped build from absolutely nothing?" Jessica finally looked up from her phone, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "You've always been jealous of Victoria's vision and leadership," she declared with her characteristic arrogance. "You've been systematically undermining my strategic initiatives since the day I joined this company." Victoria's expression hardened even further. "You have absolutely no idea what kind of damage you've done," she said, her voice rising. "I've got critical demos scheduled with potential investors who could provide the funding we need to expand. I have binding commitments to existing clients who are depending on our platform. Jessica has developed a completely new strategic direction for our product line that could revolutionize our market position. If you continue to freeze these repositories, it could sink everything we've worked for." "That's not my problem anymore," I shot back firmly. "You made your decision when you decided to push me out of the company and replace me with Jessica. I'm just protecting the work that belongs to me." There was a long, tense silence in the room before Jessica leaned back in her chair with a smirk that revealed her complete confidence in her own abilities. "Don't worry about any of this, Victoria," she said dismissively. "I'll rebuild the entire platform from scratch. Now that Chloe's finally out of the picture, her outdated code won't be holding us back anymore. I've got friends at Meta who can help us create a much more scalable and modern architecture." I actually laughed out loud at Jessica's ridiculous claim. Here was someone who had never even bothered to look at our existing codebase, let alone understand the complex systems that powered our entire business, claiming she could rebuild everything from scratch with help from her social media connections. "Jessica's absolutely right," Victoria said, apparently buying into this fantasy completely. "We were already planning to refactor the entire platform anyway. This situation is just accelerating our timeline for modernization." As I looked at my sister, I saw something I had never noticed before. Beneath all the threats and aggressive posturing, she was absolutely terrified. She was desperately afraid that her company was slipping away from her control, and instead of facing that reality honestly, She was doubling down on the delusion that Jessica could somehow save everything with her MBA theories and Silicon Valley connections. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, threatening tone. Fine. You want to play hardball with me? You want to tear down what we spent 8 years building together? I'll show you what real scorched earth tactics look like. I held her gaze steadily. I had come too far to back down now, and her threats weren't going to intimidate me into submission. My mother stepped between us, clearly distressed by the escalating hostility. Stop, both of you, she said firmly. This isn't solving anything. You're both destroying your relationship and the business at the same time. I stood up and grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. You wanted me here, Mom, and I came, I said. But I'm done trying to reason with them. They've made their choice, and now they have to live with the consequences. I turned toward the door and walked out, closing it firmly behind me without looking back. As I waited for the elevator to arrive, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. It was a message from my lawyer with an urgent update. Victoria and Jessica had just filed a comprehensive lawsuit against me, claiming that I had deliberately sabotaged the company's operations and illegally locked them out of critical business systems. They were seeking substantial damages and asking for immediate court intervention to restore their access to the repositories. I let out a short laugh and slipped my phone back into my pocket. So this was how they had decided to escalate the situation. Fine. I had given them a reasonable opportunity to walk away from this conflict with some dignity intact. Now I would make sure they had nothing left to fight for. The lawsuit hit me much harder than I had initially expected. Victoria and Jessica had decided to go completely scorched earth, accusing me of everything from deliberate corporate sabotage to outright intellectual property theft. Their legal claims were absolutely absurd when examined closely, but the stakes were very real. If they somehow managed to convince a judge that I had illegally restricted access to company systems for malicious purposes, I could potentially be liable for substantial financial damages. I had expected them to become desperate as their situation deteriorated, but I hadn't anticipated that they would be reckless enough to make such extreme accusations in a formal legal proceeding. It was like they were practically begging for a full discovery process that would expose every detail of their business practices to judicial scrutiny. I spent the entire next week completely buried in legal documents, with my attorney working around the clock to counter each new motion they filed. They had even attempted to drag our parents into the legal proceedings, apparently hoping to pressure them into testifying against me. They probably thought that involving family members would break my resolve and force me to settle on their terms. Then, just 4 days before our first scheduled court date, I received an unexpected message from Tyler, our lead security engineer. "Chloe, we need to talk privately," he wrote. "There are things you should know about what's been happening, and I can't discuss this over company communication channels." I met Tyler that night at a small, dimly lit pub in the Richmond district. He was already there when I arrived, looking visibly nervous and constantly glancing around the room as if he was worried about being overheard. He waved me over to a corner table and fidgeted with his beer glass as I sat down. "Chloe, I probably shouldn't even be here talking to you," he began, his voice low and anxious. "If Victoria and Jessica find out about this meeting, I could lose my job. With the lawsuit happening and everything falling apart, I could potentially lose my professional certifications if I'm associated with this whole mess. I need to protect my career and my reputation. Just tell me what this is about," I said, leaning forward across the table. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice even further. "Your cousin Jessica. She's been systematically exposing client data for months through her reckless changes to our systems. We're talking about insecure APIs, completely misconfigured cloud storage systems, and improper access controls that violate every basic security principle. Victoria only found out about the scope of the problems recently, but instead of addressing them properly, she's been actively helping to cover everything up. I had expected to hear about some degree of technical negligence under Jessica's leadership, but this sounded far more serious than simple incompetence. How bad are we talking about here? This could involve potential HIPAA violations for our healthcare clients, and possibly even FTC territory if our financial services clients were affected," Tyler explained. "I've been documenting all the security issues I could find and trying to fix them quietly without drawing attention to the problems. But with this lawsuit moving forward, if it goes to full discovery, absolutely everything is going to come out in court. I can't risk my professional reputation and certifications by being connected to this kind of security malpractice." He carefully slid a small flash drive across the table toward me. "Everything you need to know is on here," he said. Complete access logs, documentation of misconfigured servers, vulnerability reports that were buried, and evidence of data exposure incidents. Your cousin has been systematically undermining our security protocols for months, and your sister has been approving most of these changes or helping to hide the problems when they were discovered. It's enough evidence to trigger serious regulatory investigations if the right people see it, he continued. I documented everything I could find, but I can't be the one to report it. I have to protect myself and my career. That night, I spent hours carefully reviewing all the files Tyler had provided. The evidence was even more damaging than he had described. Patient data from our healthcare clients had been exposed through improperly secured APIs, and Jessica's digital fingerprints were all over the configuration changes that had created these vulnerabilities. Victoria's electronic approval was documented on most of these problematic changes. There were security audit reports that had been systematically falsified to hide known vulnerabilities. There were vulnerability reports detailing serious security flaws that had been intentionally buried rather than addressed. Most shocking of all, there was clear evidence that Jessica had given an outside marketing agency direct access to production environments that contained highly sensitive client data, apparently so they could create more authentic promotional materials. Victoria had personally signed off on virtually all of these security compromises, either knowingly or through willful ignorance of the technical implications. The pattern of negligence was comprehensive and well documented. The next morning, I sent everything to my lawyer along with a brief note. Let's end this legal charade once and for all. By the time our scheduled court date arrived, Victoria and Jessica found themselves completely cornered. Their code repositories remained locked and inaccessible. Their relationships with major clients were in serious jeopardy as word of the security issues began to spread. And now, with this new evidence of systematic security negligence, they were facing the possibility of regulatory investigations that could destroy what remained of their business reputation. Victoria looked absolutely exhausted as she entered the courtroom, her usual confidence completely shattered by the mounting evidence against them. Jessica wasn't even present. She had apparently flown to Los Angeles the night before, for what she claimed were emergency meetings with advisors, though it looked more like she was simply running away from the consequences of her actions. The judge took less than 3 hours to review all the evidence and issue his ruling. The case against me was completely dismissed due to overwhelming evidence of their own misconduct. Furthermore, the court ordered a comprehensive technical and security audit of the company's systems to investigate the potential data breaches and security violations that had been uncovered during the legal proceedings. I watched Victoria's face carefully as the reality of the situation finally set in completely. She hadn't just lost the lawsuit that she had initiated against me. She had lost everything: her company's reputation, her clients' trust, her technical infrastructure, and quite possibly her entire business. The comprehensive audit that the court had ordered would expose every corner-cutting decision and security compromise that had been made under her leadership. Outside the courtroom, Victoria approached me one final time. Her shoulders were slumped in defeat, and she looked like someone who had aged several years in just a few weeks. The confident, aggressive businesswoman who had fired me with a 2-sentence email was nowhere to be seen. "Chloe, you have to believe me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I honestly didn't know how severe the security issues were with Jessica's changes to our systems. I was just trying to give her room to grow and learn the business. I thought I was being a good mentor. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. There was something genuinely pathetic about seeing my sister reduced to making excuses for decisions that had destroyed her own company. Almost. "You chose Jessica over me," I said quietly but firmly. "Every single time there was a choice to be made, you picked her over your own sister, and now you're paying the price for that decision." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there alone. She suddenly looked much older than her 31 years, weighed down by the consequences of her choices, and the realization that she had destroyed something that could have been great. About a week later, my mother called to update me on what had happened to Victoria since the court ruling. She had helped Victoria find a smaller, more affordable apartment in the Richmond district, far from the luxury high-rise where she had entertained investors and clients. Victoria hadn't asked for my financial help, and honestly, I hadn't offered it either. But for my mother's sake more than Victoria's, I quietly transferred enough money to cover 4 months of rent. It was a gesture of basic human decency rather than any desire to rebuild our relationship. "Did you know the extent of what Jessica had been doing?" my mother asked during our conversation. "She's completely ruined the company, Chloe, and Victoria just let her do it. She chose Jessica over you, over her own company's integrity and reputation. I could hear the deep disappointment in my mother's voice. It wasn't just me who had been betrayed by Victoria's decisions. My mother was grappling with the realization that one daughter had systematically enabled the destruction of something valuable while throwing away her relationship with her other daughter. As for the business itself, the implosion had been truly spectacular to witness. The comprehensive audit that the court had ordered revealed that Jessica had been systematically compromising security protocols for months, possibly longer. The company was now facing potential regulatory investigations from multiple agencies concerned about data protection violations. Most of their major clients had already terminated their contracts when the security issues came to light, unwilling to risk their own reputations by association. The Oakland office had been closed entirely, and the San Francisco headquarters had been downsized to a single floor with a skeleton crew of employees trying to manage the crisis. The company that had once handled over $7 million in annual contracts was now struggling to pay basic operating expenses. Jessica had predictably disappeared to Los Angeles the moment things got serious, claiming she was pursuing new opportunities in Silicon Valley. According to my mother, Jessica had been completely ignoring Victoria's increasingly desperate phone calls and showed no apparent remorse for the damage she had caused. She had simply moved on to her next opportunity, leaving Victoria to deal with the wreckage alone. I signed the final legal papers that officially dissolved my connection to the company, severing the last technical and financial ties that bound me to Victoria's business. With my settlement secured and my professional reputation intact, I was already 5 weeks into establishing my own cybersecurity consultancy based in Toronto, Ontario. I had chosen Canada deliberately. Different country, different regulatory environment, similar industry standards, but completely separate from the Silicon Valley drama that had consumed so much of my energy. I had secured modest but functional office space in Toronto's financial district and had successfully convinced 3 of the most talented engineers from the San Francisco operation to join me in this new venture. We were building something that was entirely mine, with no family drama, no nepotism, and no compromises on technical excellence. Just sound business practices, ethical security protocols, and a commitment to serving our clients with the highest possible standards. 2 months after I had established my new consultancy, Victoria called me directly. Her voice sounded different over the phone, subdued and defeated, but still carrying that familiar undertone of entitlement that had characterized so many of our interactions over the years. "Chloe, we need to talk," she began. "The situation here is absolutely dire. Jessica has completely abandoned ship and disappeared into the Silicon Valley startup scene. We were wrong about everything. Wrong about her capabilities, wrong about your value to the company. We desperately need your help to rebuild the platform and restore our client relationships." I let her words hang in the air for a moment, feeling a complex mix of vindication and exhaustion. Part of me felt completely vindicated by her admission that they had been wrong. The other part was just tired of the entire saga and ready to move forward with my new life. "I'm sorry, Victoria, but that chapter of my life is permanently closed," I said firmly. "Come on, Chloe, we literally have nothing left," she continued, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "We were completely wrong about you, and we were completely wrong about Jessica. We can start over and rebuild the company together, the right way this time. I still have some connections throughout the industry. We could make this work." I took a deep breath before responding. "Victoria, you made your choice when you decided to prioritize Jessica over me. Now you have to live with the consequences of that decision. I've moved on to something better." "But what about our parents' retirement?" Victoria said, her voice cracking slightly as she played what she clearly thought was her strongest emotional card. "They invested a significant portion of their savings in the company. If this situation continues to deteriorate, their financial security could be completely compromised." I felt a brief twinge of sympathy, but I quickly suppressed it. Victoria had been manipulating me with guilt and family obligations for years, and I wasn't going to let her continue that pattern now. This was just another attempt to use family pressure to get what she wanted. "I already had a detailed conversation with Mom about their financial situation," I replied calmly. "She and Dad diversified their investment portfolio last year based on my specific advice. They moved most of their retirement savings into more stable, long-term investments. They'll be perfectly fine financially." "You can't just abandon your family like this, Chloe," Victoria continued, her voice rising with desperation. "After everything I've done for you over the years, everything I've given you, you can't just walk away when things get difficult." I almost laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of that statement. Everything you've done for me, Victoria? I asked incredulously. I worked for 8 years building your company from absolutely nothing, while you systematically handed everything meaningful to Jessica on a silver platter. I'm done with this conversation, and I'm done with you. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number. Maybe someday in the distant future, I would be ready to have Victoria back in my life in some extremely limited capacity, perhaps at family gatherings or major holidays. But I would never again tie my professional future to her judgment, and I would never again put my career reputation in her hands. The lesson my sister had taught me was actually quite valuable, even if she hadn't intended it that way. In business, loyalty is only as good as the legal contract it's written on and the actions that back it up. Family relationships are something entirely different, and mixing the two had been a mistake that nearly cost me everything I had worked for. So here's my question for everyone reading this. Do you think I did the right thing by refusing to help Victoria restart the company? Was I justified in protecting my work and my professional reputation, even though it meant watching my sister's business collapse completely? Or should I have tried harder to separate the family relationship from the business conflict and found a way to rebuild together? I've been thinking about this situation for months now, and I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about some of my decisions. On one hand, I protected my intellectual property and exposed serious security vulnerabilities that could have hurt innocent clients. On the other hand, I did systematically destroy a company that I had helped build, and that destruction affected more people than just Victoria and Jessica. The 3 engineers who joined me in Toronto have told me repeatedly that I made the right choice, and that Victoria and Jessica's behavior was completely unacceptable in any professional context. My new clients seem satisfied with our work, and I'm building something that feels sustainable and ethical. But there are still moments when I wonder if there was a different path I could have taken. What do you guys think? Did I handle this situation appropriately, or did I let personal emotions drive me to make decisions that were ultimately destructive for everyone involved?